Hey there, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. So, I am recording this in December of 2023, but I'm recording this for an episode I'm planning to release the first Monday of 2024, which happens to be January 1st. So, happy New Year's, everyone who is going to listen the same day it comes out. And I was thinking about it also happens to be officially episode number 100. It is not actually my 100th episode. I realize actually I'm like past that. So that milestone's already been and gone because of the ways I've chosen to number episodes and certain ones not getting a number. But in any case, happy 100 officially episodes as well. Anyone who's listened from the beginning, or if you're a newer listener, thanks for coming on board. Um, so I thought, it all just sounded so momentous and exciting. So what do I want to do for episode 100? What do I want to do for the first episode released in 2024, brand new year? I know this is a time of year where a lot of people talk about resolutions, intentions, and I love all of that stuff personally. I really enjoy having milestones to pause and reflect on how, the past has gone and really set some intentions for the future. So I wanted to offer you a really powerful exercise that I learned in one of my coaching trainings that I have returned to again and again, which is I think a really interesting and slightly different maybe way of doing New Year's intentions or resolutions, because it's less about having finite smart goals for the year, which aren't bad, but um, especially if those, as someone who's prone to overachieving or prone to perfectionism, can end up being a whole shame spiral situation when things don't go as planned. Um, so I thought I would share with you this exercise that I learned from this coaching training, which is all about having a conversation with your future self. I think sometimes, especially if we are have perfectionistic tendencies, if we have been mired in a lot of shame culture, the idea of even setting a goal, either it has to be something very achievable and we're really hyper focused on goals and we beat ourselves up if we don't achieve them, or we don't bother setting goals at all. If any of you are certainly in a stage where you're experiencing certain amounts of burnout or overwhelm or cynicism, or you're really struggling in the healthcare system, the idea of setting goals might feel impossible because everything's just too much of a mess, right? And yet we know, like, we are creative creatures, us humans, and we have really wild and active imaginations that if we want, we could be using to our own benefit. We could be using for really reclaiming a sense of control, a sense of power over our own lives, and reminding ourselves that it is possible to make great change, even within all of the things in the world that we don't have power over. And I find thinking about this future self and using this future self exercise to really activate my imagination is really powerful. One of my all-time favorites that I've brought up multiple times on my podcast already, Adrienne Marie Brown, incredible author and thinker, talks about how for most of us in our current form of society, um, it feels like we are living in someone else's imagination. She's speaking of this as someone who is um, holds a racialized identity, holds a non-thin body identity, queer identity, many things, right? And so when she's talking about living in someone else's imagination, so especially in the US where she lives, but many places in the world, with quite, white supremacist norms, patriarchal norms, just oppressive norms, where unless you are in a very, very specific identity, that's sort of the top of the power pyramid, you don't belong. Your job is to serve the top. Your job is to try and form yourself into an impossible standard, period, right? And I think I relate to that a lot, not even just personally, but certainly working in healthcare. I think for all of us working in healthcare, and especially if you find yourself grinding or agitating against what the current culture and the current system says is good and normal and what you should strive for, that you feel like you just can't do it, that feeling of like often we end up calling it imposter syndrome or something of like, I don't belong. But like another way to think of it is like, we're trying to live as our full human selves inside of someone else's imagination of what we're all supposed to be doing. So for me in family medicine, the notion that I should be seeing patients every 5 minutes is someone else's imagination. I didn't come up with that for myself. That's not my ideal. And if I'm really grinding to say, okay, I've got to live inside that imagination of someone else, it's a fruitless and it wears you down over time, that project. So how can we reclaim and use our own personal imaginations to imagine and then embody and create a future that actually feels better for us, right? And so this is but one of many ways I'm sure you could use your imagination to really dream up what it is you want to see in your life, what it is you wish was different, what your body is craving for you to create for yourself, right? Um, and then you can be sort of moving towards it. So I will now explain the exercise. So it's a simple prompt, really. Write a letter from your future self. And this future self is someone who's far enough in the future that things have changed. Things have changed for you already. For me, I play around with the timeline. Sometimes I picture myself at the end of my career. So I'm about to retire. Some people picture like deathbed, like at the end of your life looking back, you know. Um, an interesting one that I decided to do this time around was 5 years from now. So it's far enough into the future that many things could have changed, and I don't know all the details and circumstances, but it's not so far in the future that it feels less like relevant to now. And something really interesting happens. It ends up like when you write a letter from that place, imagining yourself, okay, imagine everything goes the way that it would feel so good for you to go. Imagine, what do you wish it looked like for yourself 5 years from now? Really picturing like, what kind of clothes would you be wearing? What kind of house would you be living in? Maybe what kind of clinic do you wish, or hospital setting or like work setting do you wish you were a part of? Like really thinking from that place where that future self is right where you want to be in 5 years, right? And have her imagine she is real. And now we have a time machine. And so now she is going to be writing you a letter and giving you some advice. And I say she, sorry, because first of all, the prompt says she, and also I am she. But of course, if you hold a different gender identity, please put your own pronouns into this prompt. So, um, uh, and beyond that, so writing a letter from your future self who's right where you want to be, and like have, I'm going to say them just to be a bit more inclusive, them give you some advice, right? What would your future self tell you, suggest that you stop doing? What would your future self tell you to start doing? um if your future self would be so bossy, like that's what I'm saying, the prompts from this particular exercise, but I actually stray off of it. I think giving advice is always a part of it. And like, what else might your future self say? So for me, when I think and imagine a future self, and like really it's like a creative writing exercise, fan fiction if you will, for your own life. Like, what would she want to say to me? And sometimes if it's too hard to get in that place, a good way to begin is think back, so think back 5 years from now and imagine you could be speaking to that person 5 years ago. And what would you want to offer her, him, them in terms of advice and support? Because actually you've been both versions of those people. That can be a like kind of a beginner's entryway prompt, and write from that place and see what comes up. And that can be really beautiful and healing. And then imagine then. So we're just doing some imagination of who you might be, of what circumstances you might want to have around you 5 years from now. And you're writing from that place, right? And so for me, I always find it to be incredibly inspiring and reassuring and kind of clarifying, right? Um, and I like to get into some of the specifics and really imagine like, right, like how old will my kids be, that sort of thing. Cause it really like kind of orients me and grounds me, like really what will I be like in 5 years, right? And what will be around me in 5 years? What am I not actually certain will be around me or not? And so how would I play with that? How would my future self speak to me, knowing I don't know all the details of what's to come, you know? Um, and then I write it out, and I often get some really helpful direction for the present moment. It's a way of almost revealing your values to yourself, revealing what's important to you to yourself. And it's something you can continue. There was a while there where I daily would say, what would my future self tell me today? And I would sort of just always speak from this future self place and give myself a bit of advice, and as a way of intention setting that felt more like relational. Um, it's similar to, if you've listened to my previous podcast with Jamie Lee Finch, and how I'm often now in conversation with my body and feel like I have like kind of back and forth communications with my body. This is another self, another being that I can have communication with. It's all in my imagination. I'm aware, by the way. I don't have a personal belief that I'm actually speaking to someone from the future or anything. But the thing that's amazing is our brains have such rich imaginations if we allow our brains to offer us what our brains already think is possible for us. It's so amazing. So much of our daily lives feels so limiting and so constricting and so overwhelming and so out of our control. And this is a way of just like really generating and reminding ourselves we are also creative, imaginative creatures. And um, bringing that energy into our lives, it shifts how we interact with the day to day. So I just encourage you to try it. So I will just sort of repeat the prompts again for you to consider. And then I'm going to read to you the one that I wrote for myself like a half an hour ago. Um, just because I like sharing my work, and in case something in there also ends up being advice for you that you want to take, feel free. Maybe my 5-year-old older self had that prompt for you as well. Who knows? And I really am hoping that a few people actually take me up on this. And then if you do end up doing it, let me know what comes out. Okay. Doesn't have to be 5 years older for you, but I just find that to be a bit of a concrete period of time. So for me. All right. So again, here are the prompts. Write a letter from your future self who's right where you want to be, and have your future self give you some advice. Actually, I think that's the whole prompt. The questions are less important. Just like, what advice? What would your future self want to communicate to you in terms of advice, in terms of support, in terms of encouragement, in terms of warnings? I don't know, right? Like, what's going to come up for you? It's a really interesting thing to picture. Okay, so for me, so I am 37 years old right now. So I like to really like, again, have this concrete like age thing. Again, it makes it more real for me. So I wrote this letter from my 42-year-old self. Okay. Dear 37-year-old Joan, I'm writing this to you from a very similar geographical location, in this house that you built with your husband, but now 5 years older, wiser, more lived in the world. 5 years further on in this lifelong journey of coming home to ourselves, to deepening our connection with our body, with our purpose, with the community around us. And then the rest of this letter, I just broke it into topics to sort of for prompts. So my topics were like parenting, relationships, family, medicine, and then this restorative medical education work and self. Those were my areas that I wanted to explore and hear from my future self. So starting with parenting. Your kids are now 10 and 8. They are way more independent, and this is such a relief and also deeply alarming at times. It's a continual practice to recognize they are not objects that you own and control, but rather living wild beings that you get to spend a little time with and offer support and protection where possible. Please keep practicing trusting yourself and your husband and the two of them over and over. Please continue noticing your capacity and tending to yourself first. Please continue to expand your capacity for joy and awe and love, because some of the hardest moments you will experience is when you struggle to hold the intense pleasure of really seeing these two human beings for who they are as they emerge and find their way. Also, continue to practice holding space for grief at the world they will encounter and how they will encounter the world. Nothing is predestined or written in stone. Everything can be repaired and strengthened if you are continually willing to try. Relationship. You now have a 43-year-old husband, 5 years out from the cancer diagnosis, a lot of scans and accompanying scan anxiety, a lot of ups and downs. I can't tell you the details, and the part of your brain that thinks you need to know what will happen in order to feel okay, that's the part I want to speak to now. Honey, the circumstances are the window dressing. The love, the trust, the connection is possible, irregardless of the circumstance. The more you hold onto yourself, deepen your trust and love and connection for yourself, it is astonishing what that does to your relationship with your husband as well. Family. By the way, this absolutely applies to your other relationships as well. Your family members and friends are all 5 years older too, with all that can accompany that period of time, including losing some of them potentially. Move at the speed of trust with them, my love. There can be this fear of regret that puts pressure to mend things or shift things. And it's not all bad, but also there isn't an ideal state of relationship with family or friends that you're striving to get to before anyone dies. The project of simply seeing each of these humans as clearly as you can, as exactly who they are, in all their complexity and nuance, and loving both yourself and them as best you can, that can be accomplished right now as I write this letter to you. There doesn't have to be any other destination in mind. Things will unfold with or without your interference. Follow your desires, your yearnings, your moments of inspiration to guide when you reach out, when you pull back, when you talk more or less. No relationship needs to be a project to work on and fix, just an experience to have and interact with. I really needed to hear that one. Medicine. 5 years further along in your family medicine career, the humans you work with have continued to come and go, and change is the only constant to be found in this space. The healthcare system hasn't had a miraculous, thorough overhaul, I'm afraid, but you can see more clearly than ever the true, living, pulsating, interconnected web of human connection that is the actual healthcare system underneath the creaky, crusty structures that present as the system. Each day, you show up and seek that pulse, that aliveness in every patient you encounter, in every colleague you meet, in each long distance connection that you offer to specialists or administrations. You look for and offer humanity. And it's still astonishing sometimes how richly you receive humanity in return. Your connection to your body is 5 years deeper, and you've uncovered new ways to connect and serve your patients in a generative, pleasurable way for you and for them. Your actual patients have come and go as well, whether geographically or through birth and death. And your sense of ownership has continued to recede. This is what I ask you to practice now, releasing that ownership, releasing those shoulds, releasing the constraint of false, inhuman, socialized narratives that block the way to connection. Instead, to savor the simple, beautiful act of bearing witness to another person in a time of need and doing exactly what you have capacity to offer for them, and really seeing the incredible power of that, even if it's not perceived as enough. Disrupt every guideline and process and policy that stands between you and the humans, my love, and notice how that actually shapes the culture of medicine in new, more human ways. Tell the truth as often as you can to your colleagues, to your patients, and most importantly, to yourself. Restorative medical education. At this point, I have been creating and offering restorative medical education and coaching for 6 years. I still struggle to believe it at times, but it's so much more a part of my everyday reality and such a clear expression of who I am at my best that it's also hard to remember how I lived my life before having this work. The podcast has had many thousands more listeners and therefore has impacted an innumerable number of lives in ways you will never actually be able to know or quantify. You've worked directly with hundreds of healthcare humans by now, and witnessing their incredible, unique, astonishing human contributions to medicine has altered your view of healthcare forever, and you have offered the same to each of them. Collectively, this rehumanization work has permanently altered the culture of healthcare. Your favorite quotes are not only quoted back to you, but expanded upon and iterated to even more beautifully distilled truths to share with one another. You have had the opportunity to connect with some of your greatest teachers and grown each other's impact on the world in the process. My advice for you is mostly to believe that what you're doing right now is enough. It is good. It is worthy of continually offering to the world. The less you worry about it being just right, the more space and energy you will have for simply enjoying the ride. I know you've been considering making 2024 the year you focus on expanding your capacity to enjoy, to experience pleasure. And I think you're on the right track with that one. That capacity will save you at times when your public visibility feels threatening, at times when you make mistakes and need to reflect and offer repair, at times when you feel completely in over your head. One of the secrets of the universe is that it feels good to tell the truth. So continue to make truth telling one of your most frequent pleasure practices, and you really can't go wrong. Self. Joan, I love you so much. It is such an honor to be your partner on this lifelong journey. Body, I love you so much. Thank you for your steadfast love and support for me. You really have no idea of what you are truly capable of creating, the ways in which you will invite beauty and truth into the world for others to encounter and for yourself to encounter. The stages you have stood on, the forces you have encountered, the abundance you have created for yourself, for your family, for your community. The main advice I want to give to you is never assume you can't. Always tend to and honor your body's capacity to do things deeply, thoroughly, one at a time. And trust me, you'll have time for so much. You are good. Life is good, including all the bad and pain and sorrow. And you'll never, ever be alone through it all. We have each other. We are always home together. You are already good and you're still just becoming. That felt good to read out loud. How did that feel to listen to? Did that even make sense to anyone else other than me? I have no idea. And like it says in that letter, my commitment to anyone listening or watching is in this upcoming year and for the rest of the time I do this podcast and do this work is to continue to tell the truth as I see it, to continue to be inspired by each of you that have already come into my life and that are going to in the future come into my life, and to just like recognize how it's incredible it is to be alive and to be human and to witness others being alive and human, and just to really blast through all of these shame layers, all of these shitty and human stories that hold us back, you know? Yeah. So for all of you, especially if you're struggling, if when someone is really feeling down, depressed, maybe burnt out, fenced in, trapped, I think the way that part of the work of those oppressive external forces is it robs you of your imagination of what's possible for you, your autonomy, your sense of your ability to have control of your life. And a part of that is imagination. And I'm just inviting you to consider reclaiming it for yourself. And for you, I imagine a future where even though it feels really freaky and hard and weird, even when all the sensations and feelings come up in your body, your capacity to feel them, you absolutely can feel them all. And through that process, you can create so much for your life. Your life gets to look the way you want it. It really, really does. Not exactly the way you want it in some sort of hyper controlled way, but it gets to have so much more of the feelings you want it to have. Absolutely. Even with the world on fire, right? So my imagination has all of you practicing apocalyptic medicine alongside me and reaching out when it feels right and listening when it feels right, and listening to other teachers when it feels right, the whole thing, and just collectively as collaborating and inspiring each other to recognize this living healthcare system of humans that already exists outside of the official structures. I have witnessed that and experienced that this year in so many ways. And it has reaffirmed my faith in that version of the healthcare system, and honestly, nothing else. So happy new year. And yeah, here's to another year of restoring our humanity to healthcare. All right. Take care, everybody.